Good morning, dear students. Today we will talk about the physical principles of the hemodynamics. Hemodynamics, which refers to study of the blood flow in various segments of the vascular system. It can be discussed under the following heads: the general principles of the governing factors which affect into the blood flow, the circulation of the blood flow, and its time, types of the blood flow, measurement of the blood flow, and the distribution of the blood flow to various regions of the body, and in the regulation of the blood flow in different situations. Blood flow. Flow pressure resistance relationship. Relationship between the flow of a fluid with the pressure and the resistance offered to it through a rigid tube was studied by a French physiologist Puzzles in 1842. The Puzzles results were based on the measurement of the flow of a Newtonian fluid, a fluid that showed a viscosity which was unaffected by flow rate through rigid tubes under the influence of steady heat of pressure. Puzzle's law. It's expressing the relationship between the flow and the pressure gradient, or delta P, in a long narrow tube of length, viscosity of fluid, and the radius of the tube. In this formula, you can see Q proportional into the pressure, radius, diameter of the blood vessels, and the inversely proportional into the viscosity and the length of the tube. The pressure gradient. Differences between the two ends of the tube. In other words, fluid always flows from an area of high pressure to one of lower pressure, and rate of the flow is determined by the pressure gradient. You can see from this formula always the blood flow equal or proportional into the pressure of the blood. Radius of the tube. The flow of fluid varies directly as the 4 power of the radius. Thus, if the radius is halved, the flow will decrease by 16 times and vice versa. Thus, the factor is very important for flow of blood through the blood vessels. We know that normally the radius of the aorta the highest if we compare with another blood vessels. But if you know the structure of the capillaries, in capillaries there are lots of branches from 10 to 100 branches. And if we count if each radius of the capillaries, this is the increased from the radius of the aorta. It means the radius of the capillaries the highest in between the type of the blood vessels. Viscosity of the fluid. The flow of fluid varies inversely with the viscosity of fluid. Greater the viscosity, lesser the flow, and vice versa. It means that normally we have the normal blood viscosity. It's equal to near the 5. When the 5 normal number of the viscosity, we have the normal blood flow. In some pathological cases, increase the viscosity of the blood. It means that if the high viscosity, we have the low Q or blood flow. Always the viscosity can affect to our blood flow. In some pathological cases, for example, during the vomiting, during the diarrhea, during the burning, or some hemorrhages, increase the viscosity of the blood. It means that we lost in these pathological cases our plasma part, and against this increase the formed element part, mostly our erythrocytes. That's why always in pathological or in some physiological cases, viscosity, if will be high, the flow will be low. Length of the tube. The flow is inversely proportional to the length of the tube. This is easily understandable as every segment of the tube is offering resistance to the flow. Therefore, the longer the length, greater will be the total resistance offered. What it means? It means that in some type of the people, the length of the blood vessels longer than normal. In this type of the people, the blood flow and the blood pressure at the end of these blood vessels will be low, but against this, their resistance will be high. Resistance. According to mathematical calculation in principles of the physics, resistance is represented by the length, viscosity, radius, and diameter. By replacing the in Puzel's law, you can see always the blood flow proportional into the blood pressure, delta P, and inversely proportional into the resistance. Hence, the rate of flow is inversely proportional to the resistance, as we mentioned. The Puzel's law is valid for straight rigid tube with Newtonian fluid flowing through them. Since blood vessels are not rigid and blood is not a Newtonian fluid, therefore, strictly speaking, the Puzel's law doesn't apply to flow of blood through the vascular system. Nevertheless, the important principles relating flow, pressure gradient, and resistance remain applicable, so they are discussed in relation to blood flow as the blood flow and pressure gradient relationship, also the blood flow and resistance also relationship. Blood flow and pressure gradient relationship. According to the Puzel's law, fluid always moves from an area of higher pressure to one of lower pressure. This is our P1 and P2. This downhill movement of blood occurs in the vascular system. The mean lateral pressure and the blood flow in various components of the cardiovascular system, which represented as cumulative blood volume in percent. In systemic circulation, pressure at the beginning of aorta is about 100 millimeter mercury, and near to the terminal portion of the inferior cava vena, it's nearly to zero. Therefore, if the P1 minus P2, it is equal to approximately 100 millimeter mercury. It gives us the delta P. In resistant vessels, mostly in arterioles, the distension in the absence of other influences at a given pressure heat would increase their internal radius and would correspondingly cause a raised flow at the pressure. However, in real life, it doesn't occur so because smooth muscle present in media of the arterioles, when distended, react actively to stretch by contracting. This myogenic contractile response to stretch offset the elastic effects, and so the flow in these vessels becomes less than the rigid tube. The curve becomes concave to the pressure axis. You can see from this diagram at the beginning of the systemic circulation after the left ventricle ejection, the pressure will be high, near to 100 millimeter mercury in aorta, and the blood volume also will be high. Then after ejection from the left ventricle through the aorta, then arteria, the near to arterioles, the flow and also the pressure will be decreased. Then against this, the resistance in the point of the arterioles will be very high against the Q and the P. Flow and resistance relationship. From Puzel's law, it can be derived that flow is inversely proportional to the resistance. Before discussing the effect of these factors on the blood flow, it will be worthwhile to know about the peripheral resistance unit of peripheral resistance in vascular system, and also the concept of the total peripheral resistance. As discussed above, the Puzel's law can be considered analogues of the Ohm's law. So, as flow is in millimeter dilated in second. Therefore, in vascular system, peripheral resistance unit is the millimeter of mercury. From this formula, you can see factors that affect resistance to the blood flow. According to the Puzel's law, resistance depends upon the length of tube, force, power, radius of tube, and viscosity of the fluid. Since in an intact body the length of the tube vessel doesn't change, remains constant, the major factors that determine the resistance to flow are the viscosity of the blood and radius of the blood. Blood viscosity and resistance. Resistance to blood flow is directly proportional to viscosity of the blood. Viscosity was described by the Isaac Newton in 1713 as internal friction to flow in a fluid or lack of sliperiness. These terms emphasize that when a fluid moves along the tube, lamina in the fluid slip on one another and move at different speeds, thereby causing a velocity gradient in a direction perpendicular to the wall of the tube. This velocity gradient is called the rate of shear. We know that the blood, which has a viscosity of 2.8 at the 37 Celsius degree, thus has a relative viscosity of about 4 and 5. Radius of blood vessels and resistance. As mentioned earlier, the rate of flow is proportional to the force power of the radius of the blood vessels. Thus, even a small change in the caliber of the blood vessels will produce a marked change in the blood flow. For example, at the pressure or heat of the 100 millimeter mercury, the change in flow rate with change in the radius is. It means if the radius will be high, also the flow will be more. In 1 minute, for example, in 4 millimeter of radius of the blood vessels, it's equal to 256 milliliter in 1 minute. In smallest radius, for example, in 1 millimeter, in 1 minute, the flow will be only the 1 milliliter. Among the blood vessels in aorta and large arteries, there is a little resistance. Arterioles are the major seat of the vascular resistance because of the following facts. These are small bored vessels. Their diameter is the 30 mm. Presence of large amount of smooth muscle in their wall. Thus, constriction of arterioles increase the resistance and decrease the blood flow, while dilation of the arteriole decrease the resistance and increase the blood flow. Velocity of the blood flow. The velocity refers to displacement of blood per unit time, while the rate of blood flow is the amount of blood flowing per unit time. The physiologically important aspect to be considered in relation to velocity of blood flow. Velocity and cross-sectional area relationship and velocity pressure relationship. From this formula, you can see velocity proportional to the blood flow and inversely proportional to the cross-sectional area. What it means? If the normal blood flow, normal velocity of the blood flow, then it's inversely proportional to the sectional area relationship. We know that the structure of the blood vessels in capillaries has the lots of branches, and they do the network of these capillaries. And in this part of the blood vessels, the low velocity. Types of the blood flow. Blood flow in the vascular system is of two types: laminar blood flow and the turbulent. Laminar blood flow. Laminar blood flow in the blood vessels is the normally in streamline, like the flow of liquids in narrow rigid tubes. Such a blood flow is called laminar blood flow and is considered to consist of the series of thin lamina slipping over the one another. You can see from this picture how they circulate your blood in laminar blood flow. Near to the endothelium, it will be low velocity, in the center high velocity because of the uh, part of the blood composition. Near to endothelium, the plasma part circulate, in the center the formed element. We know that the viscosity given by our erythrocytes, and in the center of these blood vessels always circulate our erythrocytes and another type of the formed element. That's why in the center high viscosity. Near to the endothelium, plasma part, liquid part, that's why low viscosity. And by this order always circulated our blood into the blood vessels. But also we have the turbulent blood flow, which is the not normal blood flow. The above described laminar blood flow occurs up to certain velocity at or above which with the blood flow becomes turbulent. The velocity of flow at which blood flow becomes turbulent is called critical velocity. For example, normally in physiological cases, we have the some branches of the blood vessels. Before this, branches occur the turbulent flow. For example, the aorta branches, arteria branches, arterioles branches. This is in physiological cases. We have the turbulent blood flow because some against to this flow. In pathological cases, for example, in atherosclerotic changes or the stenosis of the blood vessels occur the turbulent flow. Before this constriction, we have the normal blood flow. Then, in part of the after the constriction, we have the turbulent. Then again, it is becomes to laminar blood flow. If we do the conclusion that in hemodynamics, we have the several factors that change our blood flow. They are the pressure, resistance, viscosity of the blood, length of the tube, radius of the tube, and another factor. If we have the all these factors in normally, then we have the normal hemodynamics. Thanks for your attention.